There are winter nights so silent, so endlessly white, that time itself seems to forget it must keep moving. Nights when the wind stops wandering, when the sky hangs low and heavy, and the snow muffles every sound until the world feels distant, unreal, almost frozen in place. If you listen carefully on nights like this, you might hear a faint echo rising from deep within the mountains, an echo of footsteps, a long breath, a whisper carried across 150 years of history. It is not a scream, not a ghost, just a memory, left behind in the snow. This is the memory of the Donner Party. Imagine the year is 1846. A group of hopeful families travels west across America in search of a better life, a home, a chance, a beginning. Their wagons creak over dusty plains, children laugh in the warm sunlight, and the road stretches endlessly toward California. They are not soldiers, not explorers, not adventurers, just ordinary people dreaming of something brighter. But dreams change when winter arrives, before anyone is ready. Picture the mountains rising in front of them, the Sierra Nevada vast, ancient, and cold. Snow begins to fall earlier than expected. First softly, like drifting feathers, then faster, heavier, until the ground disappears beneath a blanket of white that grows deeper by the hour. The wagons stop, the oxen struggle, the road vanishes. The people look at each other. They look at the sky. They realize they cannot go forward, and they cannot turn back. So they build cabins. Light fires, ration their food, and wait. But winter in these mountains is not gentle. It isolates. It buries. It swallows sound and hope alike. Nights become colder, days become shorter. The snow becomes deeper than a man is tall. Inside the wooden cabins, the families huddle together. They share stories, prayers, and whatever warmth they can gather. The wind outside howls like a living creature, clawing at the walls, rattling the doors, reminding them they are trapped far from the world. And slowly, very slowly, hunger begins to whisper. It is not a sudden hunger, not a scream, just a soft ache, at first tolerable, familiar. Then deeper. Sharper. Unavoidable. The food runs out. The voices grow weaker. The firewood burns down to its last embers. But even in the darkest of winters, human beings search for hope. A small group ties scraps of cloth around their feet, wraps blankets around their shoulders, and prepares to walk through the endless snow to find help. They say goodbye. They promise to return. They step into the white world and disappear into the storm. Their footprints fade within minutes. Back in the cabins, the others wait. Hours turn into days. Days into weeks. And still, the snow keeps falling. There are nights when someone thinks they hear footsteps outside, soft crunches in the snow. But when they open the door, only the wind greets them. A lonely, cold wind sweeping across a land of white silence. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost feel that winter. The quiet, the cold, the slow heartbeat of fear, the heavy breath of hope. The exhaustion of waiting, endlessly waiting. Tonight, as you listen to this story in the safety of your room, wrapped in the warmth of your blanket, let the past fade in gently around you, not to frighten you, but to remind you how strong the human spirit can be, even in the coldest nights. Let the snow settle softly in your imagination. Let the fire crackle quietly in your mind. Let the mountains stand tall and silent, far away but peacefully present. Because this is not a tale of horror. It is a tale of survival, courage, resilience. A tale of people who faced the coldest winter and still held on to hope until the very end. Breathe slowly. Let the stillness of winter guide your heart into calm. Let the whisper of history lull you toward sleep. This is where the Donner story begins, in the quiet snow, beneath the silent mountains, under a sky that watched everything and told no one. Now, close your eyes. Listen. And drift softly into the past. The year was 1846, and the sun rose slowly over the wide American frontier, bathing the endless plains in warm gold. The land stretched far in every direction, open, quiet, untouched. It promised hope, opportunity, and a new beginning for anyone willing to chase it. On such a morning, The Donna Reed wagon party prepared to leave Independence, Missouri, their wagons lined in neat rows, like small wooden houses on wheels. Families stood beside them, their faces bright with anticipation. George Donner, a strong man in his early 60s with a calm voice and steady hands, checked the wheels of his wagon one last time. His wife, Tamsen Donner, adjusted the blankets covering their children. Near them stood James Reed, confident and hopeful, helping his wife Margaret onto their wagon seat. Their children played nearby, laughing in the morning sunlight, unaware of how long and difficult the journey ahead would be to these families. The West was not just a direction, it was a promise. Letters from California spoke of fertile lands, soft winters, and opportunities waiting like open doors. Newspapers called it the land where dreams could be built with one's own hands. And so, with nearly 100 men, women, and children, the Donner party prepared to take their chance. The wagons began rolling forward, creaking softly under the weight of supplies: flour, bacon, beans, tools, blankets, journals, keepsakes. Oxen trudged ahead steadily, hooves sinking slightly into the soil. The long journey to California had begun. 4 weeks. The plains welcomed them kindly. The days were warm, the nights cool and gentle. The families shared meals around campfires, told stories, sang songs. The children ran freely across the grasslands, chasing each other beneath wide open skies. Even the hardships, the dust storms, the long hours of walking felt manageable. But the first sign of trouble appeared when the party neared Fort Bridger and heard about a shortcut written in a guidebook by Lansford Hastings. This route, the Hastings Cutoff, promised to shave weeks off their journey. While some immigrants had doubts, Reed supported the idea. The urge to reach California faster was tempting. Time mattered. The Sierra Nevada snows came early. If they were lucky, the shortcut could change their fate. And so, they chose the cutoff. The decision seemed small at the time. They had no way of knowing that the shortcut would lead them into some of the most dangerous and unforgiving terrain any settlers had ever crossed. The Hastings Cutoff began gently enough, but soon the terrain grew rugged. The soil cracked and dry. Hills rose sharply. The wagons struggled. The oxen grew tired more quickly. Water sources were fewer than promised. The heat pressed down heavily during the day, while the nights grew colder. Still, they continued. The families believed they would reach California soon enough. They believed the land ahead would open like a gateway. They believed the guidebook. Hope pushed them onward, deeper into the unknown, unaware that each mile was leading them farther from safety. As days stretched into weeks, the cutoff demanded more and more. The group faced cliffs, canyons, rocky slopes, and deep sand that swallowed wheels and hooves alike. The wagons broke often, forcing the men to repair them under the scorching sun. The oxen collapsed from exhaustion. Tempers flared. Arguments erupted. Margaret Reed tried to comfort her children during long nights, whispering promises of better days ahead. Tamsen Donner wrote in her diary about the beauty of the land, though she confessed her worries in quiet lines that trembled with uncertainty. But the worst was still ahead. When they reached the Wasatch Mountains, the path became nearly impassable. They spent days clearing trees, cutting logs, moving rocks, doing the work of an entire road crew, with only their hands and simple tools. Progress slowed to a crawl. Their supplies dwindled. The shortcut that promised speed now trapped them in delays. Still, they pressed on. When they finally reached the Great Salt Lake Desert, they thought the worst was behind them. Instead, they entered an endless stretch of barren land, white, dry, shimmering under a merciless sun. 4 days they crossed the salt flats, their wagons dragging through thick crusts of salt, their oxen collapsing from thirst. The heat burned their skin, cracked their lips, and drained their strength. At night, the desert was cold and silent, the sky filled with distant stars that felt colder than the air itself. By the time they emerged from the desert, they had lost animals, wagons, supplies, and precious time. Too much time. Winter was coming. The mountains ahead were tall and white-tipped. The air grew colder every day. The families hurried forward, pushing themselves harder, praying they could cross Sierra Nevada before the snow arrived. They believed they had enough time. History would show they didn't. on a cold October day. With the mountains looming just ahead, the first snowflakes began to fall soft and innocent at first, drifting slowly down from the grey sky. The families looked up. No one spoke. No one moved. They knew what snowfall this early meant, but the snow didn't stop. Within hours, the flakes grew thicker, heavier, falling faster, blanketing the trail. The wagons sank. The oxen struggled. The mountains became white, walls rising toward the sky. The Donner Party had reached the gateway to their dreams just as winter decided to close the door. Snow fell through the mountain air with a silence so deep it seemed almost sacred. What began as soft flakes quickly thickened into a swirling white curtain. The Donner Party watched in disbelief as the trail ahead vanished beneath a rising blanket of snow. The Sierra Nevada stood before them, tall, cold, and immovable, while the world around them turned white faster than anyone imagined. The last stretch of their journey, the final climb to safety, was slipping away in front of their eyes. James Reed, who had rejoined the group after earlier conflicts, stared at the sky with tightening whirring. He had traveled roads before, fought storms and challenges, but this snowfall felt different, too sudden, too heavy, too early. He knew these mountains could trap even the strongest travelers. George Dana urged the families to move quickly. "We must try," he insisted. "We're close. If we push now, we can cross before the snow buries the pass." And so, the wagons moved forward, grinding against the growing drifts. Oxen strained, hooves slipping as they fought for footing. The children huddled beneath blankets inside the wagons, while the adults walked beside them, pressing their boots into snow that reached higher with every step. The wind picked up, carrying icy flakes that stung their skin. The trail began to rise toward the summit, but with every upward step, the snow pushed down harder. The pass was close within sight, some believed, but the storm showed no mercy. The wagons slowed, the oxen stumbled, the wheels spun helplessly in the snow, sinking deeper and deeper. By afternoon, they were forced to unhitch the teams. The wagons could go no farther. The families carried blankets, food, and tools on their backs, trying to climb on foot. But the snow up the mountain rose to their knees, then to their waists. Breathing became difficult in the thin, cold air. Children cried. Women struggled. Men pushed forward until exhaustion weakened their legs. The summit lay hidden behind a wall of white. Still, they tried. One step, then another. And another. But the snow kept falling. Finally, as light began to fade, they realized they could go no farther. The mountain had sealed itself for the winter, shutting its passage under tons of fresh snow. Reed dropped to one knee, defeated. Donna stood still, staring upward, his breath white in the freezing air. No path forward remained. Not today, not tomorrow, not until winter released its grip. They turned back, stepping carefully down the slope. Their footprints filled instantly with falling snow. When they reached the wagons again, the storm had nearly buried the wheels. The day had turned to dusk, and the temperature dropped sharply. Everyone understood the truth, though none wanted to say it aloud. They were trapped. The nearest refuge lay at Truckee Lake, later known as Donner Lake. A cluster of trees, a clearing, a place where cabins could be built before darkness consumed them. The families hurried toward the lake, their clothes soaked, their fingers numb, their spirits shaken. By nightfall they reached the lake. The snow lay deep here as well, but not as heavy as in the pass. The water lay dark and still, a mirror of the storm-filled sky. The tall pines surrounding the lake whispered in the wind, their branches heavy with fresh snow. It was not home, it was not safety, but it was the only shelter they had. The men gathered quickly to build makeshift cabins, using whatever logs and tools they had left. The work was slow. Cold numbed their hands. The snow fell into their eyes, and the night pressed around them like a tight fist. Yet they continued, driven by desperation. Inside the half-finished cabins, the families huddled. Breath fogged the air, and every surface felt icy. Small fires crackled weakly, offering little warmth. Children clung to their mothers, trembling. The older men tried to comfort them, though fear tightened their voices. The storm raged all night. By morning, The world was silent. The lake lay frozen at its edges. The cabins stood buried halfway up their walls. The wagons were nearly invisible beneath white mounts. The families stepped outside into a landscape that no longer resembled the world they had known. They realized they would not be leaving anytime soon. The days passed slowly at Truckee Lake. Snow fell often, sometimes lightly, other times in heavy sheets that made even opening the cabin door a struggle. The wind howled through the pines, rattling branches and carrying the cold deep into their bones. Food began to run low. Hunting became nearly impossible as animals retreated into the depths of winter. The nights were worse. The firewood dwindled. The wind pried at the cabins. The cold crawled into every corner, wrapping itself around tired bodies. The children cried quietly when hunger grew too sharp. Their parents whispered comfort, though their own voices shook. Still, they held on. When the weather improved even briefly, small groups went out searching for food. They dug through deep snow for roots. They searched the edges of the lake for anything edible. The older boys set snares, hoping for rabbits. Sometimes they found something. Often they didn't. Yet hope remained alive, thin, fragile, flickering like a small flame through a winter storm. The families believed rescue would come. They believed another wagon train might arrive. They believed help was on its way. So they rationed every crumb, every strip of dried meat, every handful of flour, every drop of water. They melted from snow. But winter had only just begun. The storms grew longer. The silence grew heavier. The hunger grew sharper. And the mountains, tall and ancient, watched quietly and moved, unchanged, as if carved from the very breath of the cold itself. Inside the cabins, as the wind moaned through the trees, the Donner Party waited and prayed. They did not yet know how long the winter would last. They did not yet know how deep their struggle would become. They did not yet know how much courage they would need simply to survive the next day. But they did know this: the Sierra Nevada would not let them leave easily. Winter settled over Truckee Lake like a heavy blanket that refused to lift. Days blended into nights, and nights into long stretches of silence, broken only by the crack of frozen branches and the distant groan of settling snow. The Donner Party, once a hopeful caravan crossing the open plains, now found themselves sealed inside a world made entirely of white and endless, unmoving wilderness. Inside the cabins, breath frosted in the air. Frost crystals grew on walls and blankets. Each morning began the same: someone pushing against the door, forcing it open through a wall of fresh snow. The cold rushed inside instantly, biting at fingers and faces. The fires burned low. The woodpile shrank faster than anyone wanted to admit. Food became the center of every whispered conversation. Flour dwindled to almost nothing. The last bits of bacon had been eaten weeks ago. The hides that once covered their wagons were cut into strips and boiled, softened just enough to chew. They tasted of smoke and dirt, but the families ate them anyway. Children grew quieter. Their faces thinned. Their eyes, once bright with curiosity, now watched the adults anxiously, sensing worrying even as they didn't understand it. At night, the wind scraped across the roof like invisible hands. Sometimes it carried faint sounds, echoes, moans, distant cracks that made people sit up in their blankets, listening with tightened hearts. It was easy to imagine voices out there in the dark, footsteps, whispers. But when the men checked, they found only snow. Always snow. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the white peaks and cast long shadows across the lake, Margaret Reed gathered her children closer. Their small faces reflected the warm glow of a tiny fire. She spoke softly, telling them stories of California, of green valleys, warm winters, and gardens filled with fruit. The children listened, leaning against her, letting her words create a world far away from the cold that surrounded them. In the Donner cabin, Tamsin Donner wrote by lantern light. Her hands trembled from the cold as she penned each line in her journal. She wrote about hope, about fear, about the beauty of the snow even as it brought suffering. She wrote because writing was the only thing that made the long nights bearable. But even Tamsin's calmness could not stop the growing dread that crept through the camp like a shadow. One morning, the men gathered outside. Reed, Donna, Graves, Eddie all stood quietly, their faces pale and hollow. A decision hung in the freezing air. They could not wait any longer. Rescue would not come fast enough. Someone had to go out into the mountains. Someone had to walk through the deep snow and try to reach the nearest settlement, no matter how far. No matter how dangerous. The plan was desperate. But desperation had become their only companion. 15 of the strongest, both men and a few women, wrapped cloth around their feet, tied blankets tight around their bodies, and prepared crude snowshoes from wood and rawhide. They gathered what little food they had left, which amounted to barely a handful per person. The children watched with wide eyes, clutching their parents as the group prepared to leave. Snow fell gently as they said their goodbyes. No one said the word goodbye, but everyone felt it. Everyone understood the risk. Everyone knew this small group was stepping into a world where even trees and stones disappeared under winter's weight. Margaret Reed held her husband James close before he joined the group. "Come back," she whispered, voice trembling. "Please come back," he nodded, though his eyes revealed uncertainty. "I'll find help, I promise." The group stepped onto the frozen surface of the lake, moving slowly at first, each footprint leaving deep impressions in the snow. They became smaller and smaller as they crossed the frozen land, until they disappeared into the tree line, swallowed by the mountains. Back at the cabins, silence grew heavier. The days that followed were some of the hardest. The storms returned, fierce and relentless, pounding the roofs with icy pellets. The wind shrieked like a living creature, making the cabin walls tremble. The snow rose higher around the structures, burying them deeper each day. Firewood became dangerously low. Men ventured out to gather fallen branches, but each trip took longer and cost more strength. Hunger gnawed at their bodies. Fingers grew numb. Faces reddened from the cold. Even the strongest seemed smaller now, reduced by winter's grip. Inside the Reed cabin, young Patty Reed tried to comfort her younger siblings. She shared stories and humor. Inside the Donner cabin, an injury worsened. George Donner had cut his hand while repairing a wagon weeks ago. The wound became infected. His strength faded. Tamsin kept him warm, fed him snow melt water, tended to him with herbs, but the infection spread. He grew weaker with each passing day. Still, Tamsin remained calm. Her presence steadied the entire camp. She helped other families, shared what little she had, comforted crying children, and wrote in her journal with a composed sadness that belied the fear inside her heart. Outside, the landscape lay silent and impossibly white, as if time itself had frozen. The sun rarely broke through the dense clouds. Every direction looked the same: snow-covered hills, snow-covered trees, snow-covered sky. One night, when the wind died completely, the families heard a sound that both comforted and frightened them. A faint knock on one of the cabin walls. A second knock. Then silence. The adults exchanged confused glances. Was it the storm settling? An animal? Or could someone be returning? Minutes passed. No more knocks sounded. The children fell asleep that night, imagining that help was coming. The adults lay awake, not knowing what to believe. Winter had begun to play tricks on their senses, shadows that moved without wind, sounds that echoed strangely, the constant pressure of hunger blurring reality. But one thing was certain: the small rescue group out in the mountains had now been gone many days. Too many days. And the families inside the cabins could only hope and wait and hold each other through the nights as the Sierra Nevada watched in its silent and moving way. Days turned into weeks, and winter deepened its grip on the trapped families. Snow piled higher around the cabins until only their roofs remained visible above the cold, white world. Inside, the people clung to each other and to hope, though both were wearing thin. The mountains had become their walls, the storm their prison, and hunger their constant companion. The small rescue group that had left days earlier, 15 brave souls walking into the storm, remained on everyone's mind. Each morning, families opened the cabin door and scanned the snowy horizon, hoping to see figures approaching. Each night, they listened for footsteps, voices, anything that suggested the group had survived. But the mountains remained silent, offering no answer. The snowshoe party had become ghosts in the minds of those left behind, uncertain, unreachable, swallowed by winter. Inside the reed cabin, Margaret tried her best to keep her children calm. She melted snow for water, rationed tiny pieces of hide, sang to them in soft whispers. The children clung to her, their small faces pale and thin. Fear and hunger had settled into their eyes. They rarely laughed now. Even their play had become quiet and tired. In the Donner cabin, the situation darkened. George Dorner's infection worsened. His wound had swollen, turned dark, and the fever spread through his body. He drifted in and out of sleep, muttering at times, silent at others. Tamsin stayed by his side, endlessly patient. She cleaned the wound with melted snow and herbs, whispered soothing words, wrapped him in every warm cloth they had. But winter does not bargain, and the mountains do not pity. Tamsin stepped outside often to gather firewood or search for anything edible, pine needles, bark, anything to keep the children from starving. She moved quietly, her footprints deep in the snow, her breath a pale mist in the bitter air. Each trip outside felt like stepping into another world, vast, cold, indifferent. The cabins became small islands of flickering warmth in an ocean of white. When the wind picked up, it howled across the lake like a living creature, making the cabins tremble. The families huddled close together, listening to the storm scrape at the wooden walls. Sometimes they whispered stories to distract the children. Other times, they sat silently, exhausted by fear, and still. No sign of rescue. One morning, the sky cleared for a brief moment. The snow glittered under a weak sun, and the air felt strangely still. A few men took the opportunity to hunt. They trekked along the lake, axes in hand, searching for any sign of life. But winter had chased everything away. Even the smallest creatures had vanished into burrows deep beneath the snow, returning empty-handed. They tried to hide their disappointment, but the others saw it in their faces. Hunger tightened its grip. That night, the wind calmed. A deep quiet filled the camp, so complete it made the families uneasy. Silence in the mountains was unsettling. It made every sound sharper, every breath louder. As the camp settled into an easy rest, a sudden cry came from one of the cabins. A woman had fainted from hunger. Men rushed inside, carrying snow to melt for water, searching desperately for anything soft enough to chew. The sound of children crying echoed across the camp. Their thin voices wavered through the still air, fragile as frost on glass. Margaret Reed watched her children sleep that night, their breaths shallow. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to quiet the ache inside. She whispered a promise to them. "We will survive this." But she did not know if she could keep it. The next morning, the sky darkened again. Thick clouds rolled over the peaks, heavy with new snow. The air grew colder, sharper. The families braced themselves. Another storm was coming. The wind arrived first, sweeping down from the mountain tops with a hollow roar. Snow followed, thick, swirling, relentless. The storm swallowed the cabins whole, burying them deeper. 4 hours, the families waited in darkness, the windows blocked by snow, the fires burning low. The storm lasted all night. When dawn finally broke, the world outside looked unfamiliar. The snow had risen so high that getting out of the cabins took nearly an hour. They shoveled through the packed drifts with wooden plates, broken boards, anything they could find. When they finally emerged, pale morning light revealed a landscape that had erased every trace of paths, footprints, and hope. The lake was nearly invisible under its frozen crust. The trees bowed under the weight of fresh snow. The cabins looked smaller, weaker. Another week passed. Food nearly ran out. The children's cheeks hollowed further. Their eyes lost brightness. Some of them stopped speaking altogether, sitting quietly with blankets wrapped around their shoulders. The adults whispered among themselves at night, "What if rescue doesn't come? What if the snowshoe group never returns? How long can we last?" But no one said these things aloud where the children could hear. Still, there were small moments of light. One afternoon, the clouds parted briefly. The sun gleamed through like a soft lantern. The warmth, though faint, reminded the families of the world beyond winter. Some children stepped outside and let the sunlight touch their faces. For a moment, they smiled again. Tamsin read to the Donner children from a small book she kept wrapped in cloth. Her calm voice filled the cabin in a gentle fire, warming even the cold silence. Margaret hummed lullabies to her own children, her voice steady despite everything. The sound of a mother's voice brought stillness to the cabin, like a quiet promise. Night after night, the families clung to hope, not because the world gave them reason, but because hope was the only thing that kept their hearts beating. And then one evening, as the fire burned low and the sky turned dark, a sound came from outside. A soft, distant crunch in the snow. Another dot, and another dot. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps approaching from the trees. The families froze. The children looked up. The men reached for lanterns. Someone was coming. But whether it was friend or something else carried by the mountains, no one knew. Not yet. The footsteps approached slowly, each crunch of snow echoing through the still mountain air. Inside the cabins, hearts tightened, breath held. The children clung to their mothers, and the men tightened their grip on the lanterns, unsure whether to hope or fear. Winter had already blurred their sense of reality. Sometimes shadows moved when no one was there. Sometimes wind sounded like whispered voices. But these footsteps, these were real. The sound grew closer. Then, through the thick curtain of snow outside, a faint figure appeared. The lantern light flickering from the cabins barely reached him. At first he looked like part of the storm itself, a dark shape emerging from white silence. Slowly, painfully, he stumbled forward until he fell to his knees near the first cabin. A shout rose. Someone recognized him. It was one of the 15 from the snowshoe party. The door burst open, and men rushed out, lifting him off the ground. His face was gaunt, lips cracked, eyes sunken. Snow clung to his clothes in thick layers. Every breath rattled in his chest. They carried him inside and laid him near the fire. For several minutes, no one spoke. They only watched as the faint warmth of the flames touched his frozen skin. Finally, with a trembling voice, he whispered, "We tried the mountains, the storm." His words faded into a heavy silence. He had survived, but he was alone. Margaret Reed knelt beside him, her voice soft but urgent. "Where are the others? Did anyone make it farther? Are they alive?" The man's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head slowly, painfully. They kept walking. But the snow, it was too deep, too cold. Some couldn't go on. Some fell. "We tried to help, but..." His voice broke. He covered his face with trembling hands. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling fire. No one asked more questions. Not tonight. The truth already hung heavy in the air. The families cared for him. Melting snow for water, warming his hands, wrapping him in blankets. But the fear remained. If the strongest among them barely survived, what chance did the rest have? Over the next few days, the weather worsened again. Snowfall returned with a cruel persistence that buried everything deeper. The sky darkened almost constantly. Days felt like an extended twilight. Nights felt endless. The man told them more when he regained strength. The snowshoe party had walked 4 days blinded by storms, weakened by hunger. Some collapsed and never rose again. Others wandered off, disoriented by the endless white. One by one, the group thinned. He had lost count of how many. All he remembered was cold, endless, biting, merciless. As he spoke, the families felt an ache grow inside them. Hope was becoming harder to hold. Yet life in the cabins continued, because it had to. Every morning, someone shoveled snow away from the door. Someone melted snow for water. Someone gathered firewood, though it was now so buried that the men had to dig through drifts taller than themselves to find fallen branches. The smallest twigs became precious. Hunger tightened its grip further. Children cried quietly at night, their stomachs aching with emptiness. The adults tried to soothe them, telling stories, singing soft lullabies, stroking their hair. But hunger has a way of settling deep in the bones, silent, constant, exhausting. One day, young Patty Reed fainted. Her siblings rushed to her side, shaking her gently. Margaret held her daughter close, tears filling her eyes. Patty woke moments later, but the fear in Margaret's heart remained. The mothers shared what scraps they had. Some gave portions meant for themselves to their children. Some ate only snow to quiet the burning in their stomach. Still, they fought to remain hopeful. A small moment of brightness came one morning when the clouds parted briefly and sunlight shimmered across the lake. For a few minutes, the world looked peaceful again. Children stepped outside, letting the pale sun touch their faces. They laughed a weak laugh, but real. It reminded the adults why they had to survive. But winter had not finished testing them. Another storm arrived suddenly, slamming into the camp with icy ferocity. Wind roared down from the mountains, shaking the cabins like fragile toys. Snow blew sideways, piling against the doors and windows. Inside, families huddled close to their dying fires, whispering prayers into the darkness. During the storm's second night, something unexpected happened. A faint tapping on the Donna cabin wall. Then another tap, and another. TAMSE and froze. Listening. It was too rhythmic to be the wind. She took a lantern and opened the door slowly, shielding the flame with her hand. A blast of cold air rushed inside, making the lantern flicker violently. She stepped outside. The snow was deep, the wind relentless, but there against the cabin wall she found something half buried in the snow. A small bundle of sticks. Firewood. Someone or something had left it there. She looked around, lantern raised, heart pounding, but the storm revealed nothing. No footprints, no figures, only swirling snow. She brought the bundle inside, closing the door quickly. The others stared as she set it by the fire. Where did that come from? Someone whispered. I don't know, Tamsin said softly, but it's real, and it's enough to keep the fire going tonight. They burned the sticks gratefully, letting their frozen limbs relax in the warmth. Some whispered that it must have been a survivor from the snowshoe party. Some whispered it was a miracle. Some, too exhausted to think clearly, said nothing at all. As the fire crackled, the families drifted into an easy sleep, grateful for even the smallest mercy. But before dawn, the storm returned with renewed fury. Snow pounded the cabins. Wind shrieked across the lake. The cold pressed in harder than before. And somewhere deep in the mountains, something moved. A presence shaped by winter, a weight in the air they could feel, but not see. A reminder that the Sierra Nevada was alive in its own silence. Way. The families clung to each other through the long night, breathing slowly. Holding on. Waiting for the storm to pass, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. Not knowing how much more they could endure, only knowing this: survival had become the only story they had left to write. The storm lasted longer than anyone expected. For 3 days and 3 nights, the Sierra Nevada unleashed everything it had. Snow drifted against the cabins in heavy waves, pushing up the walls, covering the windows, burying the world outside in a deep, suffocating silence. Inside, the Donner Party clung to life by the fading glow of their fires, each ember precious, each breath a small act of endurance. When the storm finally passed, morning arrived with a dull grey sky. The air was eerily still, as if the entire world had paused to catch its breath. Slowly, carefully, the families opened the cabin doors. Snow fell inward, a soft avalanche spilling across the wooden floors. It took several minutes to dig a path out. Once outside, the family stared in disbelief. The snow had risen so high that the cabins looked sunken into the earth. The lake was invisible beneath a white plain, trees bent under the weight of ice, their branches drooping like tired arms. The world had been reshaped, smooth, silent, endless. No sound. No birds. No footprints. Just white in every direction. The Donner Party had entered the heart of winter. Life inside the cabins grew harder with each passing day. The storm had trapped them deeper, cutting off even the faintest hope of hunting or foraging. Firewood was so buried that finding it required hours of digging. Food was almost gone. The leather from old shoes and straps was boiled again and again. Hide softened into a thick, bitter paste that barely tasted like food, but kept the stomach from collapsing. Some tried chewing pine bark to quiet the hunger. It helped little. One afternoon, young Virginia Reed began coughing softly. Margaret held her daughter close, rubbing her thin arms. The cough was not strong, but it lingered, an unsettling reminder of how fragile the children had become. Across the lake, in the Donner camp, the situation worsened. George Donner could not rise anymore. His infection had spread too far. Fever consumed him. He drifted between sleep and waking, whispering all the things he hoped to see someday: the California hills, his children grown, warm sunlight on his skin. Tamsin stayed by his side, never leaving him for long. She still helped others, still brought comfort, still encouraged the families to stay strong. But each evening, when she returned to George, her eyes filled with quiet sorrow. Hunger turned hours into long stretches of suffering. The adults spoke less. The children slept more, their bodies trying to conserve energy. Silence grew inside the cabins, broken only by the crackle of thin firewood and the faint murmur of prayers whispered into darkness. One cold morning, two men decided to check the nearby woods again for meat. They strapped on snowshoes, wrapped blankets around their shoulders, and pushed through the deep drifts. The world beyond the lake felt unfamiliar, like a dream too quiet to trust. The sky was dim, the air heavy, every sound muffled. They searched 4 hours around fallen trees, across ridges, beneath frozen branches. Their movements were slow, their breaths short. The snow swallowed every step, making progress difficult. Finally, they spotted something. Tracks. Faint, almost erased by wind, but real. Not human. Not large. Rabbit tracks. Hope flickered in their chests. They followed the trail deeper into the woods, moving slowly to avoid breaking the fragile prints. The hunt was delicate, almost reverent. After nearly an hour, they saw it: a small white hare, blending with the snow, nibbling on the bark of a frozen plant. They froze. The animal froze. The mountain air froze. Then the hare darted. The men chased, stumbling through the snow, hearts pounding, legs burning with exhaustion. The animal zigzagged between trees, leaping over drifts. For a moment, it seemed impossible to catch, but hunger sharpened their pursuit. Finally, one of the men lunged forward, slipping but managing to bring his arm down. The hare squealed, then fell silent. It was small. Pathetically small, not enough to feed even one family. But it was hope, a symbol of survival. The men carried it back with a mix of relief and sadness. When they returned to camp, the families emerged slowly, eyes widening at the sight of the small creature. For a moment, a soft sound rose, something close to happiness. Though fragile, the hare was cooked in boiling water, the tiny meat shared among many. Each person received only a bite or two, but the warmth lifted their spirits. For the first time in weeks, a faint sense of life returned to the cabin. But winter was not finished. That night, the temperature dropped drastically. The cold felt sharper, more intense. Even inside the cabins, frost crept along the walls like white veins. The fires had to be kept burning constantly, or the cold would swallow the families whole. In the Reed cabin, the children shivered under blankets. Margaret wrapped her arms around them, trying to share her warmth. She pressed her cheek to Patty's forehead, whispering soft prayers. Outside, the wind began to howl again, slowly at first, then rising into a mournful cry that echoed across the frozen lake. It was the kind of wind that made the cabins groan, the kind that carried strange echoes through the trees. Near midnight, something unusual happened. The faint sound of footsteps again. Soft. Cautious. Approaching through the snow. Then a light knock on the Reed cabin door. Margaret froze. The men stood, reaching for lanterns. Hearts pounded in the dark. No one spoke. A shadow moved outside, faint against the window. James Reed, trembling, opened the door a crack. A thin, frost-covered woman stood there, her eyes hollow, her lips blue, her face barely recognizable. One of the snowshoe party survivors. She collapsed into his arms. The families gasped. They lifted her inside, placing her near the fire. Her voice was faint, barely a whisper. We saw mountains, days, storm, lost track. Too many fell. Tears slid down her cheeks, But I had to come back. For the children. She looked at Margaret. Then at the others. I tried. But they're still out there. Her voice broke. We didn't make it far. And they won't last much longer. Silence fell. Cold, heavy, unforgiving. The children stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. Outside, the wind continued to howl along. Sorrowful sound that told the camp winter's hardest nights were still ahead. The woman slept for nearly an entire day, her breathing shallow but steady. The warmth of the fire slowly returned color to her face, though her eyes still carried the distant emptiness of someone who had walked too far into winter. When she finally awoke, the cabin fell silent. Every face turned toward her, some hopeful, some fearful, all desperate to hear anything that could tell them what had happened to the others. Her voice cracked when she spoke. The mountains, they swallowed us. She closed her eyes, gathering strength. We walked 4 days. Each morning the snow was deeper. Each night the cold was sharper. Her shoulders shook softly. We could not see the sun. We could not see the sky. Only white, everywhere. The families listened in complete stillness. Even the wind outside seemed to quiet. She went on. At first, we stayed together. We tried to keep each other warm. But the snow, it was like walking through heavy clouds. We lost the trail. We lost our strength. She covered her face with trembling hands. I don't know how many fell. Too many. Some just sat down and closed their eyes. The room filled with a sorrow that words could not ease. Children pressed closer to their mothers. Men looked down at their hands, knowing the truth. They could no longer wait for the snowshoe party to save them. They had to survive on their own. But how? Snow buried the land so completely that foraging was hopeless. The few bits of hide left were nearly inedible. Firewood required hours of digging. Hunger pressed deeper every day, hollowing the faces of the families. Yet, life continued because it had to. Each morning began with the same small rituals: melting snow, strengthening weak fires, brushing frost from sleeping children, whispering encouragement even when hope felt thin. These rituals kept them human, kept them connected to life. In the Dollar cabin, the firelight glowed softly around George Donner. His fever had worsened. His breath came short and shallow. Tamsin sat beside him, wiping his forehead with a warm cloth, whispering stories to keep his mind at rest. She rarely slept. Her strength came from sheer willpower, her love for her family, pushing her through each hour. She told her children to stay brave. She told the Reed children stories when their mother went searching for wood. She even comforted other families in the darkest hours. To many, Tamsin Donner became the quiet heart of the camp. But the mountains remained unmoved. One evening, the sky turned a deep blue as night approached. The snow glowed faintly under the rising moon, casting soft silver light across the frozen lake. It almost looked peaceful. Almost. The families stepped outside briefly, taking in the quiet. For a moment, they let the cold air settle on their skin, breathing in deeply, as though sensing the world beyond their suffering. It was then that they heard it. A faint cry, far away, carried on the wind. A sound too soft to be an animal, too sharp to be the storm's echo. A human cry. The men immediately grabbed lanterns. The women pulled the children back into the cabins. The men trudged toward the edge of the woods, the snow pulling at their boots with each step. Then the lantern light caught something. A figure collapsed in the snow, thin, motionless, barely alive. They rushed forward, lifting the body carefully. It was another from the snowshoe party, one of the younger men. His lips were blue, his fingers white with frost, but he breathed, just barely. The men carried him back to camp, struggling through the knee-deep drifts. When they reached the cabin, they laid him near the fire. The families watched as his chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. When he finally opened his eyes, he whispered one word: "Help." Then he cried quietly, helplessly, like a child. The sound of his cries filled the cabin with a sorrow that touched every heart. Between sobs, he tried to speak. "We thought we saw a cabin, but it was snow, only snow." His voice trembled. "We walked in circles. We lost each other. I thought I saw a light, but maybe it was the moon." He shook his head. "I don't remember. I don't know where they are now. The adults exchange looks heavy with grief. 2 survivors had returned. 13 were still missing. Reality settled like frost beneath their skin. That night, as the families tried to sleep, the air felt colder than usual. The wind rattled the cabins softly, like fingers tapping at the walls. The trees groaned under the weight of snow. The fire hissed and cracked, fighting against the night. And then a sound, a deep rumble far away. From the mountains. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the wind. It was something shifting, snow breaking loose. On the high peaks. An avalanche, or something close. The sound rolled through the valley, like the low growl of a hidden beast. Children woke. Mothers held them tighter. Men stared toward the mountains with fear in their eyes. The Sierra Nevada had moved, and when mountains move, they change everything. The next morning dawned strangely bright. The snow outside glittered like glass. The cabins creaked softly as the families emerged, blinking in the pale sunlight. Something felt different. The air carried a quiet tension, as though the mountains were waiting. The young survivor from the night before sat outside, bundled in blankets. He stared at the peaks with a hollow expression. "It's coming," he whispered. Margaret Reed knelt beside him. "What is?" He swallowed hard. "More storms." His voice trembled. "And this time, they will be worse." The camp fell silent. In the distance, dark clouds gathered like a slow, inevitable wave. The families looked at each other with dread. Because if the storms grew worse, if the mountains closed in further, there would be no more survivors. And deep within the cabins, the cold seemed to thicken, settling into the wood, into the blankets, into their very bones. The harshest chapter of their winter was only beginning. The clouds gathered slowly at first, drifting over the peaks, like dark sails unfurling across the sky. The families watched from their cabins, hearts heavy, breaths shallow. They had already endured storms strong enough to bury the world. But something about this one felt different, heavier, colder, more deliberate, as if the mountains themselves were preparing for another trial. Inside the Reed cabin, Margaret wrapped her children tightly in blankets. The small fire glowed faintly, fighting a losing battle against the growing cold. Her youngest child whimpered softly, pressing a thin face into her shoulder. Margaret whispered comforting words, even though her own voice trembled. In the Donna cabin, Tamsin checked on George. His breathing was weaker than the day before. Fever burned through him with a steady heat that no amount of snowmelt water could soothe. Tamsin held his hand gently, her eyes filled with sorrow, but not despair. She had learned to carry both. Outside, the sky darkened until day felt like dusk. The air thickened. Even the wind held its breath. Then the storm arrived, not with a gentle snowfall, not with the harmless whisper of winter, but with a force that shook the cabins to their foundations. Snow slammed against the walls like waves crashing against cliffs. The wind roared down from the mountains, howling with a voice that sounded almost alive. The families huddled together as the storm raged. Fires flickered dangerously, threatening to go out under the relentless cold. Frost crept across the windows in patterns that looked like frozen rivers. The cabins groaned as the wind pushed and pulled, searching for a way inside. The storm lasted through the night. When morning finally returned, the world lay under a fresh, heavy layer of snow. The cabins were nearly buried. The doors barely opened. The smoke from chimneys struggled upward, pressed down by the heavy air. Every breath froze instantly. Hunger, already a constant companion, now deepened into something more dangerous, a slow, painful weakness that crawled through the body like an invisible weight. Children slept more, their bodies conserving what little strength remained. Adults moved slowly, deliberately, each action requiring enormous effort. The 2 survivors from the snowshoe party remained ill, drifting in and out of consciousness. Their presence was both a blessing and a reminder of how desperate their situation truly was. Inside the cabins, the families whispered the same question: how long can we last? Yet, despite the fear, they maintained their rituals. Rituals kept them alive. Melting snow for water. Feeding the children first, sharing the last pieces of hide, keeping the fire alive no matter what. One afternoon, When the storm momentarily eased, a group of men attempted to find firewood. They tied ropes around their waists so they wouldn't lose each other in the deep drifts and headed into the forest. Snow reached their chests. Each step felt like walking through thick mud, but still, they pressed on, driven by necessity. The forest was silent to silent. Even the usual creaks of frozen trees seemed absent. The men moved carefully, watching the sky, listening for distant rumblings that might signal an avalanche. After hours of searching, they found a fallen tree buried beneath the snow. They dug it out with their bare hands, using whatever tools they had left. Fingers numb, breathing shallow, they worked until they had enough wood to drag back to camp. It was difficult, but they succeeded. Small victories like this kept them alive. Back at the cabins, the children gathered around the new firewood, watching the flames dance. For a moment, warmth filled the tiny room. Eyelids drooped, shoulders relaxed. Someone even smiled. In moments like these, the Donner Party remembered they were still human, still capable of hope. But winter, relentless as ever, returned with fresh snow that same night. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was clear. The next it darkened into a swirling mass. Snow fell so heavily that even the sound of wind became muffled under its weight. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Inside, the families felt the cold seep through the walls. The fires did their best, but the temperature dropped until everyone could see their breath in thick white clouds. In the Reed cabin, Patty Reed whispered to her mother, "Will we leave here someday?" Margaret stroked her daughter's hair. "Yes, sweetheart, we will." Even if she didn't believe it, she said it, because that was what mothers did. In the Graves cabin, voices murmured in whirring. The older children tried to help the younger ones, sharing blankets, holding hands. They had grown used to fear, but tonight felt different. Then, late into the night, a sound broke through the noise of the storm, a distant cry. Then another. The men froze. Did they imagine it? Another cry came, louder this time. Someone was out there. Lanterns were lit. The men wrapped themselves in blankets and opened the cabin door against the storm. Squinting into the white void, shapes moved in the distant shadows, stumbling toward them. For a moment, fear surfaced. Was it the mountains playing tricks again? Was it someone lost? Or, as the figures drew closer, lantern light revealed their faces. Gaunt, frozen, barely alive, but human. More survivors from the snowshoe party. There were 3 this time, 2 men and a girl no older than 12. They collapsed near the cabin, unable to speak, unable to stand. The families rushed forward, carrying them inside, wrapping them in blankets, placing them by the fire. Their eyes flickered with recognition. Tears streamed down their frostbitten cheeks. They whispered one thing, again and again, voices shaking. We tried to find help." The camp fell silent. The truth hung heavy in the air. If even these few strongest souls had barely survived, if rescue remained so far away, if the storms kept coming, how much longer could any of them endure? The mountains, ever indifferent, loomed silently outside. Their snow-covered peaks watched over the trapped families, unmovable and ancient as if carved from the very bones of winter itself. Inside the cabins, the fires burned low, casting small circles of light that flickered against the wooden walls, and the Donner Party, exhausted and afraid, waited for morning, hoping it would bring warmth, hoping it would bring food, hoping it would bring rescue. But winter had other plans, and the deepest part of their struggle had only just begun. Morning came without sunlight. The sky remained a muted grey, heavy and low, as if the mountains wished to keep the world dim. Inside the cabins, the newly arrived survivors lay wrapped in blankets, their breaths shallow, their bodies trembling from a cold that had seeped so deeply to be chased away quickly. The children watched them quietly, their eyes wide with worrying. Adults moved carefully around the small rooms, tending to the fires, melting snow, offering whatever warmth they could. No one asked the returning survivors too many questions they were too weak to answer, and the answers, everyone suspected, might be too painful to hear. Still, The truth came out slowly. The girl small, pale. Her lips cracked from cold spoke in a soft voice. We walked, and each day felt colder. We lost so many. Her voice trembled. Sometimes the snow was so high we couldn't see the sky. Sometimes we didn't know if we were walking uphill or down. She paused, looking at her hands. Sometimes I thought the mountains were whispering. The adults exchanged uneasy glances. The wind in the Sierra Nevada often played tricks on the senses. Voices could echo strangely. The mind, weakened by hunger and cold, could imagine things that felt real. The returning men spoke as well about days without food, about wandering in circles during storms, about friends who fell and never stood up again. They described the endless white, the bitter cold, the way the mountains felt alive in their silence. Their stories confirmed what the camp feared. Rescue was still far away, and the mountains were not finished with them. The next few days passed slowly. The storm eased, but the cold deepened. The cabins groaned under the weight of thick snow. Water froze overnight. Firewood shrank. People became quieter, conserving their strength. But small moments of humanity remained. One afternoon, the families gathered in the reed cabin. While the survivors rested, the children, though weak, whispered among themselves, sharing tiny stories and memories of warmer days. Their voices were soft, but in a cabin filled with exhaustion, even a whisper felt like a spark of life. Margaret Reed sat beside her daughter Patty, brushing her hair gently. Patty had grown thinner, but her eyes still held a soft determination. "Mama," she whispered, "when we get to California, I want to see flowers again." Margaret's smile trembled. "You will, sweetheart, you will." Across the camp, Tamsin Donna spoke quietly to her daughters, teaching them small lessons, telling them stories, keeping their minds occupied. Even with her husband gravely ill, she never let fear take her voice. She was the calm within the storm. But time was running out. The food supply had dwindled to almost nothing. Even boiled hide was nearly gone. The children's bellies ached constantly. Adults felt dizzy, their legs weak from hunger. In the evenings, conversations slowed to silence. People stared at the fire, at the walls, at their hands. Anything to distract themselves from the gnawing emptiness. The two remaining survivors from the snowshoe party began to speak of something else, something no one wanted to hear. "There is a settlement beyond the mountains," one whispered. "We were close, so close." His voice cracked. "If one more group tries, maybe they can make it." But who could go? Who still had the strength? Who could face the cold and storms and endless snow? Silence answered. The families looked at each other with empty, exhausted eyes. No one volunteered. No one dared. But they all knew deep inside that another attempt was necessary. If help didn't come soon, the mountains would claim them all. That night, as the families tried to sleep, the wind whispered through the pines. The cabins creaked softly. The children shivered. The adults stared into the dark. Then a faint noise from outside. Not footsteps. Not a cry. Not wind. A low rumble. Deep. Distant. Unmistakable. Snow. Shifting on the upper slopes. The mountains were changing again. The next morning, a group of men decided to check the surroundings. They stepped outside cautiously, squinting at the sky. The storm clouds lingered, but did not descend. The air was eerily calm. As they approached the edge of the frozen lake, they saw something that made their heart sink. A large, fresh crack in the thick snowpack on a ridge above the camp. An avalanche path. If it came down, if the wind shifted, if the snow broke again, the entire camp could be buried. They returned quickly to warn the others. Fear spread through the cabins, quiet but sharp. The mountains no longer felt like silent guardians. They felt alive, unpredictable, dangerous. Inside the cabins, families held each other close, listening for signs of collapse. Every distant crack made their hearts race. That evening, the sky turned a strange color, bruised purple, streaked with gray. The air felt heavy, as if it carried a warning. Margaret Reed stood at the cabin door, staring at the horizon. "Something is coming," she whispered. Tamsin Donna, standing beside her, nodded slowly. Yes, the mountains are shifting. As night fell, the families lay together, wrapped in thin blankets, sharing warmth, whispering prayers. The fires burned low. The wind pressed against the walls. Snow creaked on the mountain slopes. And in the darkness, a quiet truth settled into the hearts of all who remained. They could not wait much longer. They would either leave the mountains or become part of them. But dawn always comes, even in the harshest winter. And when morning arrived, a new sound echoed across the valley. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Human. But not from the woods. Not from the lake. From the direction of the mountains. Someone, or something, was coming, and the camp held its breath once more. The footsteps approached slowly, breaking the silence that had settled over the snow-covered valley. Inside the cabins, no one moved, no one breathed. A wave of fear and hope swept through the trapped families. They had seen too many shadows in the snow, heard too many tricks of the wind. The mountains played strange games during winter, and yet these footsteps felt different. They were too steady, too deliberate. Too human. Lanterns were lit. Mothers gathered their children. Men tightened their coats and stepped outside. Squinting through the pale light of dawn, the sky was a soft gray, the air thick with cold. Snow crunched beneath their feet as they moved toward the sound. Then, through the swirling frost, a figure appeared, not thin and dying like the others, not broken by the storm. But strong, upright, determined. Man, wrapped in heavy fur, carrying a long wooden staff. Behind him more figures, 6 men, then 8. Then 10. Lanterns swung in their hands, snowshoes strapped to their feet, shoulders broad, faces fierce with exhaustion but sharp with purpose. For a breathless moment, the Donner Party simply stared, unable to speak, unable to believe what their eyes told them. Then the first man called out, "We came for you." The words echoed across the frozen lake, a miracle. Rescue. Real rescue. Finally. Some of the strongest men in the camp dropped to their knees. Others covered their faces with trembling hands. The children cried out softly, clinging to their mothers, unsure whether to laugh or sob. The rescuers reached the first cabin and embraced the survivors. Their clothes were stiff with frost, their voices cracked with emotion. They had climbed through the worst snow the Sierra Nevada could offer. They had followed faint tracks, fought storms, and nearly turned back many times. But something pushed them forward, the hope that someone was still alive. Inside the reed cabin, the rescuers stepped in and froze at the sight. Thin faces, sunken eyes, children wrapped in blankets like fragile birds. Women holding their families together with sheer willpower. One of the rescuers whispered, "My God." But there was no time for grief, only action. They handed out blankets, dried meat, hard bread, warm broth. The survivors ate slowly, their bodies shaking with relief. Even a small bite brought tears. Hunger, so constant and cruel, finally loosened its grip. Meanwhile, outside, more rescuers spread out among the cabins. They found the weakest first, children, the elderly, the sick. They checked wounds, gave water, lifted bodies that could barely move. In the Donner cabin, the rescuers found Tamsin sitting beside George. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale. Tamsin looked up with tired eyes, relief and sorrow mingling in her expression. "Help the children first," she whispered. The rescuers nodded. But they saw the truth. George was too weak to travel. Even so, they wrapped him in blankets, held his hand, and promised to return for him. Tamsin kissed his forehead softly. "Hold on," she whispered. "Please hold on." Outside, preparations began quickly. The rescuers knew they couldn't take everyone at once. The journey back through the mountains was brutal. Only the strongest could make it on the first trip. A painful choice, but a necessary one. Families gathered outside the cabins as names were called. Children first, then the healthier adults. The rest would wait for the next rescue party. Patty Reed, thin but determined, held tightly to her mother's hand. Margaret hugged all her children, tears freezing on her cheeks as she whispered promises. "You will go. You must go. I will follow soon." The rescuers lifted the children, wrapped them tightly, and strapped them securely. The smallest cried softly. The older ones looked back at their parents, fear mixing with hope. The men began the long walk back through the snow, carrying the children toward safety. The sound of their footsteps faded slowly into the trees. Inside the camp, silence returned. But it was a different silence now, not hopeless, not empty, but waiting. There was rescue. There was hope. There was a way out. Yet winter had one more test left. That night, a new storm rolled in, sudden and fierce. Snow hammered the cabins. Wind shrieked through the valley. The rescuers who stayed behind gathered the weakest survivors into a single cabin to conserve heat. Inside, candles flickered, fires burned low. People huddled together in tight circles, sharing warmth, whispering prayers. TAMSE and moved from group to group, whispering gentle words, comforting children, encouraging the sick. She never let fear show in her eyes. But the storm raged all night, shaking the cabins with violent force. At dawn, the world lay buried once more. The rescuers opened the doors to a wall of snow. They dug their way out, breath steaming, hands numb. But the sight outside made their hearts sink. The mountains had shifted again. Avalanche debris lay scattered in the distance. New cracks cut across the slopes. The safe passage they used before was now gone. Still, they refused to leave without the others. Over the next days, they dug paths through snow taller than men. They carried survivors on makeshift sleds. They lit fires at night under freezing skies. Their determination became a force as strong as the winter itself. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the last survivors were gathered and led out of the camp. Tamsin stayed until the very end. She refused to leave George's side, refused to abandon him, refused to walk away from the man she loved. The rescuers begged her. They pleaded. They warned her the storms would only grow worse. But she stayed. Her final act was love, steadfast, unyielding. Tragic. When the rescuers returned weeks later, after the mountains opened again, they found the camp silent. Snow covered. Still. The cabins were empty. The wind whispered through broken windows. The mountains held their secrets. Tamsin was gone. George was gone. Many had fallen, but many had lived. Children reached California. Families rebuilt their lives. The story of their survival spread across the world. The Donner Party became a symbol of hope, of tragedy, of endurance, of the brutal beauty of the mountains. And even now, when winter wind sweeps through the Sierra Nevada, some say you can still hear faint echoes, the footsteps of rescuers, the whispers of snowshoe travelers, the quiet prayers of mothers, and the stubborn heartbeat of those who refuse to surrender. The mountains remember. History remembers. And the world, even after all these years, still listens to the quiet, haunting story of the Donner Winter.